Hi everyone. If everyone wants to take a seat, or if you want to stand, that's absolutely fine as well. So we will get going. We will start our event now. Thank you so much, firstly, for everyone for coming to join us for this Frontiers of Circular Architecture event. This is a sideline event for the new European Bauhaus Festival here in Brussels at Torre Taxi. The question we're here to ask is, how can we use design and architecture to fight climate change and, as part of doing that, building ourselves a livable future? My name is Jack Parrock. I'm a Brussels-based correspondent and presenter and host of such things like this, and I'm really honoured to be here today, to be part of this. It's an exciting event. It's a different one, and you'll see why in a short while. So for this section of our event, for this beginning couple of hours, we're going to have 4 speakers. 2 are coming from the world of architecture, and 2 are coming from the world of funding and how we fund these kinds of things. I'm going to introduce them a little bit later. But as I said, one of the things that we're doing here today, in the spirit of the Bauhaus, is we are going to have some dancers joining us throughout our speeches. Now, they've prepared a couple of things, but we're going to test them a little bit, just in my little intro. So I'm going to ask Samuele and Clara, who are here today with us. Let's give them a round of applause. And just as thank you so much, guys, for being here. This is exciting. I've done a lot of events in my time, and I've never had this. So I'm really excited to see what you guys do. Let's give them a bit of a test to begin with. So I will talk about the reason why we're here and why this is important, and we'll see what they make of what I'm saying. So we know that half of all the raw materials that are used annually go into construction. And we also know that 90% of biodiversity loss is related to the extraction of raw materials. And because of this sixth mass extinction that we are triggering as a human race, we should protect at least 30% of global land and sea areas for wildlife by 2030. But there is hope. There is hope, and we can do this. We are able to make a difference. This is the point in this Bauhaus event, the idea that's been put forward by the European Union, and that's why we are all here in this room today. There we go. So, we're going to ask, yeah. So the speeches that you're going to hear from thank you so much, thank you. They will come up, they will come up and down as the speeches are going on, as I say. And between some of these sections, we're also going to have some Q&A sessions with our speakers and our participants. And for that, we're going to use the Slido tool. If you've never used this before, it's in your web browser. You guys can use it here in the audience as well, if you wish. Or we will be able to hand you a microphone if you'd like to participate in that way. But we also have, and I will direct this towards the cameras at the back of the room that are filming us and are streaming this event live, we also have online participants. The way to connect with Slido is to connect on slido.com in a web browser, and then in the little section that you can fill in, put in the hashtag 9622. And it will direct you towards our event here. And I, on my pad, can pick up the questions and I can put them to our speakers. As we are continuing with our event, it would be wonderful if you would tell me, when you're writing those questions, perhaps who you would like to answer it, who specifically sparks that, just so I can make sure that it's being answered by the person that you would like it to be answered by. So I will introduce our speakers in a short moment, but to start with, from the Nordic Council of Ministers, we're just going to have a short introductory statement by Anders Vestergaard Jensen. So I'll bring you up on the stage, Anders, and I'll hand you this microphone, which I hope should work. Yeah. And we'll give you the stage.
Thanks.
So.
Thanks very much. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you all for coming here live and online. I love special events, so I'm really looking forward to this. I never tried this before either one. But it's great to open this. My name is Anders Vestergaard Jensen. As it's presented here, I'm from the Nordic Council of Ministers. It's great to see such a great crowd here and a lot of Nordic projects presented here today, and also other projects. But it's also great to be here because this new European Bauhaus has been talking about it for some years now, and we all have been, I've at least been asking myself, what is this new European Bauhaus? What is it? Can we get some definitions on it? Can we put something on the table we can understand? But it has been like kind of floating around. But coming here today and entering the hall down there and seeing all the others projects come to life, I think for me at least it made the whole new European Bauhaus much more alive. So it's a really great pleasure to be here today, and I really look forward for the discussions here. So also on behalf of Nordic Council Ministers, welcome and have a nice day.
Thank you very much. Cheers. So thank you so much, Anders. We really appreciate you for hosting the event, obviously, and being part of that, and for having us here. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our 4 speakers. I'm going to invite them all onto the stage first, actually, if I may. So we're going to have Ines Karkulati, who's an architect from the VAPAA Collective, Architects of Disruption. Sorry, not destruction. That would be. That's a very different event. We have Sinus Lunga, who is an urban planner and architect and a founding partner at Effect. We also have Maya Ferk, who's a senior program manager for the Laudes Foundation, and Louise Callerat-Roper, who is the CEO of Volans, which is, these 2 ladies are involved in the sort of funding side, as I said, and these are more in the architecture side. So we're going to start with you, Ines. We're going to hand you a microphone. The dancers are going to be participating as well. Feel free to write your questions into Slido already. The Q&A sections will come and go throughout. I'll sort of bring them up. And you can write those questions in there. So, Ines, thank you so much for being here. And the floor is yours.
So, thank you, Jack. And thank you for our wonderful dancers. Looking forward to it. And good day to everyone here today. I'm really glad to be here and also honored to start this series of keynotes today. It sounds like a very interesting package we're going to have. And for me, personally, this is a great opportunity because the topics of New European Bauhaus are extremely relevant to all designers. As we know, all design is always oriented towards the future. A teacup that is designed today might be made tomorrow, or a building in 3 years, or a major city transformation might span over 30 years or more. And as we are constantly working with something that is yet to be realized, it is extremely important for the meaningfulness of our work that we ask ourselves the question how and what we should be designing in order to build a livable future instead of eroding the very earth that sustains all life. And it means that what we design today can at worst be tomorrow's waste, or at best almost eternal. And now let's see if I can use the machine. This one. Okay. So my name is Ines Karkulahti, and I'm an architect and urban planner and one of the founders of Vapa Collective. Vapa is a Helsinki-based creative collective, and in this era of environmental crisis, we examine architecture as a phenomenon, the role architects play in shaping sustainable living, and try and envision a world that is fundamentally changed and transformed, but still worth pursuing. Our most recent work was a collection of essays called Architects of Disruption. And in this collection, we collected 9 essays from eminent climate thinkers. My topic today draws from our initial ideas behind this publication, and even though I will mainly refer to architecture, most of this phenomena applies to all design and society in general. So, architecture obviously has an apparent and very literal role in the ecological reconstruction at hand. And as the climate and biodiversity crises are quantifiable problems, like carbon emissions are soaring, natural populations are dwindling, and species are becoming extinct, etc., it is easy to be diverted to think that also architecture's greatest potential lies within the quantitative metrics and material solutions. But as we know, what we are experiencing right now, it is not just climate change, but a pivotal societal change set in motion by the changing climate. And without this kind of comprehensive cultural shift, the well-intended technical solutions, such as greener technology, improved resource efficiency, and environmental regulations, will remain insular and feel like they're forced on people. So the implementation of these requires, of course, well thought out strategies, but eventually culture is not remade on command. So this is where arts and architecture come in. The arts and architecture have historically played an important and necessary part in questioning established practices and holding up a mirror to society's values. Artists and designers can act as catalysts for change in this era as well, but it requires an understanding of and willingness to challenge the current state of affairs. So, from the very beginning, we at Vapaa have been exploring this other potential of architecture and how it intertwines with the values and aesthetic, and how these together can help to build the cultural shift needed. So when envisioning a new world, our understanding of aesthetic and beauty can tell a lot of the values of our society. What we have learned to consider valuable, we see as beautiful, and what we see as beautiful, we value. So at the same time, architecture is a form of art, but it is also the moment when these values are transformed into our physical world, the moment when abstract ideals are cemented into something permanent for a long time to come. And this framework largely defines what kinds of lifestyle people can or are tempted to choose. And therefore, designs do not only embody these values, but they also play an active part in rebuilding them. And what sets architecture especially apart from other arts is the potential of realization inherent in all design. Whereas a utopic art piece or art piece presenting a utopia can give us the ability to see things in a different light, it is still separated from our everyday. It is something to ponder on, but is not something to live in. But even the most utopic paper architecture that is never intended to be realized as such is still a design of something to come. It is not a completed art piece in its own right. And this is the inbuilt possibility that maybe someone would go all the way and build this. And this connects the vision to our daily lives and makes us try to inhabit the world that it is offering to us. And this is where the transformative power of design, and especially designing utopias, lies. So in order to find out these possible directions of new architecture, we at Vapaa want to understand what kinds of values are manifested in our current designs and where do they derive from. And as we all know, our time is that of fossil societies, a short era in human history, but ever more influential. And up until industrialization, natural resources, meaning energy and materials, were scarce and thus valuable. Austerity defined the limits for what was considered good architecture, and in cold regions, like our Western societies mostly are, thick-walled buildings wrapped themselves tightly around the heat source. But on the verge of modernism, the harnessing of fossil fuels opened up a completely new scale of human exploitation of natural resources and enabled us to forget these natural limitations. The technological development seemed to be able to solve all of humanity's problems, and thus it became justified and kind of logical to rid oneself of the things old or worn to make space for the brave new world. An aesthetic of newness was born, and with it, a society to which a quest for newness has value in its own right. And simultaneously, form broke away from the long-held tradition of what was considered high-quality architecture. Thick walls gave way to large steel-framed windows as architects tried to blur the line between interior and exterior spaces. Also, the idea of maintenance-free was invented, meaning that repairing was substituted by replacing. And as energy and material seemed infinite, this newfound expression proudly manifested that architecture had escaped the confines of resource scarcity. But in today's era of climate and biodiversity crises, we have awoken to the fact that even innovations that conserve natural resources somewhere often just move the problem elsewhere. And technology alone seems to have at its best limited potential for resolving the crisis within the given time frame. But however, the aesthetic of newness based on this technocentric worldview still governs our thinking and cripples our actions. Quite subconsciously, we tend to think that this crisis as well just needs a new innovation, a new product, and a new model of construction that will be used to substitute the old products and old buildings. So we try fervently to build ourselves out of this predicament, but only end up accelerating the phenomenon. We are attempting to resolve a crisis that is caused by overexploitation of resources with an approach and aesthetic that were created to manifest the very opposite. So design and creative work need to liberate themselves from the concept of newness, and this is not too tricky, since creativity is not just or even at all about creating shiny new things. It is about solving problems, seeking new solutions, and developing an aesthetic reflecting that. So we need to use design and creativity to answer questions by producing processes and ideas instead of only producing products. We need a new holistic aesthetic where there's no longer place for maintenance-free and thus disposability. Because when our aesthetic values patina, when we allow the signs of production and treatment to be seen, we can start to repair, recycle, and reuse. And the manifestation of time and care spent on an object will substitute the current values as the measure of prestige. The modernistic idea of genius author will also give way to longer processes where architecture does not begin or end with one author. And also when virgin construction quiets down, architecture's role in building physical spaces becomes leveled with its role in building social spaces. And by paying attention to these social spaces, we can create a path to understand the disruption at hand and learn from each other and absorb new values. It is a possibility for exploration or peer-to-peer learning where there's freedom to vision and discuss alternative futures. It can help people to create personal connections to the new aesthetic and lead them to embody its values in their everyday lifestyles. So in VAPA, we use small-scale design projects to study and discuss these proposed directions, not just with designers, but with the public. So right before I end, I want to share these two pictures of our installation, 39,186 vacant rooms. And for anyone thinking it's a funny thing to have a large number in the title, don't do it. So the installation was presented last summer at Concentrico Festival in Spain, in Logroño, and formed by this modular structure of insect hotels made of local materials. And after the festival was over, all the hotels, separate hotels, were distributed to the public, or the residents of the city. And this idea was to give the people an opportunity to take action in the fight against biodiversity loss and care for the insect within the city structure. And it also meant that the discussion kind of created around this piece didn't end and confine itself in the festival, but it also continued afterwards in the yards and homes of these people. And the guy in the right-hand picture, picking up the hotel, was the first to queue up at 12 noon on Monday and paid special attention when choosing the right module. And it turned out that he wasn't picking up one for himself, but for his grandchild. And this is a kind of very simple example of how the social space emerging intentionally around a very simple installation allowed post-human care for the younger generation, and also organically intergenerational care for this person and his family. Okay. Well, so to conclude, there's the last dia missing, but it's fine. There, no? Okay, it doesn't matter. To conclude, for the design of the future, it is not enough to correspond with what we perceive to be beautiful today, because the criteria for what is good have changed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ines. That was a fascinating start, I think you'll all agree, to our discussion here. Lots to think about. There's lots of questions already coming in for you as well, because these ideas of generational beauty, I love the idea of what you were saying about the grandfather as well, giving to the grandchildren, and instead of it being my house, it's the house that other people will live in after me, you know. Anyway, without further ado, I'm going to invite Ines up to give a presentation as well. We can check that the slides are here, so thank you so much, and we'll speak afterwards. Continue to put your questions through the Slido as well, and if you have questions in the audience, we'll be able to have a short Q&A after Sines's speech.
Well, first of all, just thank you a lot for inviting to this event. I, like many others, am kind of struggling to find out what European Bauhaus is about, and it's so wonderful to be here and being part of defining that. And especially I'm grateful to have to be accompanied by dancers here. It's a little bit of a technical presentation today, so I think that you guys will help the digestion of what I'm presenting here. I'm a partner and founder of an architectural company in Copenhagen. We're 60 people working with architecture, urbanism, and landscape, and basically we're both thinkers and builders. And this is a part of the group in one of our projects. We're called Effect because it's a Danish word for impact. So everything that we do, we try to measure on the impact from the early design stages throughout. It means social, environmental, and economic impact. But around 10 years ago, we kind of widened our scope of work as we kind of saw the kind of wider impact of our civilization on the globe around us. You probably know these graphs of socioeconomic trends on the left-hand side, and then the derived ecological impact on the right-hand side. If you break it up, it's kind of the development of the last 250 years, global population, energy consumption, water usage, air trips, deforestation, the species being extinct, the rise of atmospheric CO2 in our atmosphere, and the rising surface temperatures. And when you put all these together, you get this quite scary portrait of our age. And starting with the Industrial Revolution, but currently kind of peaking at this day in our time. And when we saw this, I remember this kind of reading this book and understanding this. It's kind of a physical feeling of something is really wrong. We need to do something. So we decided to make it our business of our company to see how can we help breaking some of these curves and get back into a balanced relation with the ecosystems that we're part of. And so within architecture, within every type of business, this is exactly how I felt. This is a complete transformation of how we think about what we do. And at that time, 10 years ago, we didn't have any clients asking us to solve these problems. We were just kind of this design and build consultancy. So we started a proactive research unit doing research and design, seeing how we could kind of be part of asking the really deep questions that lies behind the way that we need to rethink our world. So now we have a consultancy department and a research unit, and as you can imagine, that's pretty synergetic. So today I'm just going to share with you a few of the projects that we are working on, and we ask the bigger questions on how we build, like can neighborhoods feed and power themselves? Can we make building systems that can work like ecosystems? Can urban development and reforestation go hand in hand? These are just examples of projects. Can we build new homes within planetary boundaries? Can we build homes that are healthy for both people and planet? And the last question here is one that we asked in partnership with Velux and Mo, a research project initiated by Velux and that has been developed over the last 2 years, trying to rethink the building culture of our residential homes. Basically, the way that we have been developing the built environment for the last many years is kind of isolating, in many ways, people from the natural environment that we are part of. And we wanted to investigate, can we actually, with architecture, reintegrate with nature for the benefit of both planet and people. You might say that architecture is in fact the way that we people shape our relationship with the environment around us. So in that sense, architecture is quite kind of spearheading the relationship with our surrounding environment, both kind of physically but also technically in the way that we use and reuse material and resources in the way that we live. So some of the bigger kind of challenges, the main challenges we looked at here was the building industry emissions. You probably know this. In Europe, it's 36% of CO2 emissions that derives from buildings and homes. We're projected to build another 5 billion square meters between now and 30. And in that time, we need to radically reduce our emissions to get within planetary boundaries. It's a huge challenge that is so deep and systemic that we're only just starting to understand it. At the same time, we have health issues in our homes, and this is part of what Velux also brought to the table, having been working with indoor climate for decades. We spent 90% of our time indoor, and not really getting to terms with the fact that our indoor environment is 2 to 5 times more polluted than the outdoor environment. In fact, 1 out of 3 European kids are growing up in unhealthy indoor climate. So if you follow Joseph Allen, a professor from Harvard, the person who designs your building is really more important to your health than your doctor. So that's a pretty big responsibility to grasp. And we tried to do that by working with a new vision for our homes and the way that we live together, which is called Living Places. It's basically This is weird. Okay, never mind. It's basically trying to look at, something happened with the images here. It's really weird. But basically, what we did was taking a benchmark of a traditional type house home and then compare that with the vision for living places, which is not that picture there on the right-hand side. Working with 5 different principles: healthy, shared, simple, adaptive, and scalable. I'll go through a few of them with you here. Where the first one is healthy planet concepts, basically focusing a lot on how we can transform the way we build from being emitting CO2 in materials in the operation of our buildings to sequester and store carbon in our buildings and reduce the emissions during operations. Usually, in the last 50 years, we've only been looking at operation when we look at the emission of our buildings. But if you take a whole life cycle perspective on our buildings, you can see that the big emissions are actually here in the early stage in the construction, and then in the end of life phase, where buildings are turned into waste and then basically incinerated. So what we try to do by mainly just reducing or converting our materials into biogene materials is like using wood. You store carbon in the early stages, and basically if you lower the emissions during the operation, you can actually have a kind of a positive footprint during the whole life of the building, until you technically, in the way you calculate it, turn that building into waste and incinerate it. And it's a very simple way of getting there, just converting the materials, and it took us a year to develop the project, but we are at a stage where we are quite sure that we are reducing the emissions with 60% to a result which is below 4 kilos CO2 per square meter per year. For those of you who know this way of calculating LCA, it's pretty low. And what's, I think, the biggest finding in this is not coming out super clear here, but the biggest finding in this, there's something wrong with the slides, but the finding is basically that what we did is not rocket science. We didn't invent any new materials. We didn't come up with any solutions that are not on the market today. We just studied every building component, from the foundation to the deck, to the facade materials, to the insulation, to the load-bearing walls, and by all the time picking solutions that are lower. Here we are. There's something wrong with these slides, but that we'll just have to live with that. You can see here the lower emissions on all these, getting to this quite nice result. We also worked a lot with the indoor climate, light, thermal environment, indoor quality, connection to the outdoor and acoustics, and carefully designed the house for servicing all these indoor environment qualities. And the good thing about it is that you actually get buildings by using natural materials and connection to outdoor natural light that just appears pretty nice to live in. We also worked with what we call the simple concept, which is trying to reduce the complexity in how we build. So separating the main building system from all the technical systems, so that you can reuse and replace the technical systems when they need to be replaced. They have a shorter life cycle than the rest of the building. So that's basically by designing for disassembly, we enable that these materials can be taken back and reused. We also worked on a sharing concept, also not coming up on the screen here. I hope this will become better when we get further into the presentation. An adaptive concept looking at quite different typologies that can fit in different... there's something completely wrong with these slides. I'll just go ahead and talk. Why is this man here? So that these can be implemented in different. I can't even imagine how this happened, but so that we can build in denser cities as well as in suburban areas. like you can see in these images here, or rural. The first project that we're going to build with this model is in Copenhagen and will open in February 23 for the World Congress of Architecture. So it's a model home positioned in the very center of Copenhagen in Jernbanebyen. It's a small village of 2 houses that we built differently so we can measure and test them, and then 5 pavilions that will be hosting different types of exhibition. And this is all to kind of show the results and to test and learn. And I really honestly invite you to come there, see the houses, and share the learnings that we have done from these projects. One of the other projects that we started up in the period of working with the carbon footprint of the Velux project was a question that arose that we need to have measurable targets for all the rest of the buildings that we do. So we asked ourselves, can we design a roadmap for the building industry to get within planetary boundaries? Because we didn't know when is a building actually within planetary boundaries. So we set down a team of some of the best researchers in Denmark and also from the Stockholm Resilience Center that was financed by 2 Danish foundations, starting to investigate how can we get on track in the next 10 years. This is a famous quote from Johan Rockström. What happens in the next 10 years will likely determine the state of the planet we hand over for future generations. And what's most urgent for us to look at is the climate change and the emissions of CO2 that we create through construction. And even though there's plenty of different ways that we can benchmark and certify sustainability, we didn't really find any that are really precisely benchmarking against planetary boundaries. So we wanted to investigate that. How do you get from the kind of the global boundaries to actionable metrics in the way we built? So what we did, since we're architects and not scientists, we tried to visualize the information that we got from the scientists. We have a global budget of 3.45 gigatons of CO2, of human emitted CO2. Then we have a global population that will be 8.5 billion in 2030. So that gives us an allocation budget per person of 406 kilo CO2 equivalents per person. If you then divide that by what we consume, the amount of money we spend for our housing, that would give you 25% of that CO2 budget for housing, leaving a budget per person of 87.4 kilos of CO2 dedicated to housing. So this is kind of an algorithm that we tried out and developed with the researchers that then gave us the question, how do we reach that goal? So either you can reduce your amount of square meters per person to like 9.7 square meters and then keep emitting the same amount per square meter, or if you want to keep the same amount of square meters, we need to reduce the emissions per square meter to something in the range of 1.6 kilo CO2 per square meter. So that gives us a kind of a status of where we are today and where we need to be to get within planetary boundaries. And then we had the researchers help us find out how fast do we need to get there using the Paris Accord and the reduction speed of calculated by from the IPCC report 2018 to stay within the 1.5 degree scenario. So that gave us the kind of speed of getting there, and that actually delivers a kind of staircase for the industry of getting down to where we need to be. So this is kind of our currently validated roadmap, but then all sorts of new questions start popping up, and we're asking, is this really the right questions we have asked? Oh yeah, by the way, the Living Places project I just showed you is actually down here, so that's kind of well below and a place that we might need to reach in somewhere in the 30s. And what that tells me is that we can actually, the first steps here will be quite easy. We need to just get started, all of us, so that we can work together on the solutions when we need to go really low on the CO2. But the questions are also, should the allocation be based on personal or national allocations? Should we account for, how do we account for other building typologies than housing? And how do we keep track of the people per square meter ratio? Because that's really a tricky one to follow up on. So we also looked at a different approach that would be kind of allocating, according to the Paris Accord, a certain budget for Denmark that then has allocated a certain amount of that budget, 30%, to construction. Out of that, there's a certain amount, 50%, allocated for housing. And if we continue to build the same amount of square meters housing that we do, then you get a final allocation of around 2.8 kilos per square meter. So this is a different allocation model that might be easier to implement, but that's not the one we have worked with the scientists on yet. We also realized that there's actually a huge performance gap between what we measure in LCA and what is actually emitted, both the actual energy usage in houses, but also the unaccounted phases. And that needs to be incorporated somehow also so that we get the full picture. Like when you budget a house, there's also a budget for unaccounted costs that you need to bring into the calculation. But the main idea of this roadmap is actually to make it clear for everybody, architects, developers, investors, contractors, engineers, if they're actually kind of working inside the roadmap towards planetary boundaries or they're outside. And we think that would be very healthy for us to know, so that being green can maybe become a little bit more black and white. And what we hope is actually to have all sorts of partners register the projects, like agreeing with the target and then just being transparent about the targets here, so that we can help each other getting there. Because one thing that we have learned in all these processes, nobody is going to get there alone. We need to have transformative partnerships to get there. So this is a tool for us to partner around, and we'd love this to become an international way to benchmark whether or not we are on the right track to getting within planetary boundaries. So that's the last slide. Thanks, and thank you guys.
Can you take the microphone up with me? Yeah, are you okay? Okay, stay up there, Sines, thank you so much. Thank you so much to Samuel and Clara. This is, I mean, that's quite a lot of work for them, so let's give them another round of applause. It's been really interesting, really lovely. And I'll invite Ines back up, if I may. So keep your microphone in your hand. And we do have some questions. Firstly, just for the purposes of sort of my planning and structuring this, if you can raise your hand if there is a question or something that you'd like to contribute here in the room so I can work that out. Just pop your hand up now. Or maybe you've been dropping them into the thing. So if there are, just raise your hand and we'll go through our questions. Here you go. Yeah. No, you've both got a microphone. So I think I'll ask a question if you don't mind. Firstly, to you, Sines. Like the benchmark that you were talking about there is super interesting, right? You have constructed that. I saw on the bottom there was Aarhus University, some other people. And obviously you've contributed that together. But these sort of benchmarks need to be, like you said, adopted. How well are sort of politicians engaging with that? Is this European Bauhaus idea, is this connecting? Is the Commission listening to those kind of things? Are you presenting it to them?
We're presenting it now.
Yeah. But I mean, how much acceptance is there of that as a suggestion?
But what I do find is we've just started to kind of go and present this and get questions and see how is the world reacting to this. And what I experience is that there's a huge eagerness to get some precise guidelines. So they are asking the same questions that we did, and I think that people just want to know exactly how. What should they kind of aim for, and how should they measure?
Yeah, it feels weird that we haven't known this already. Like you were saying, this is what we need to know if we're going to reach our climate goals.
It's exactly what we said. Isn't there some engineer or some government that did this precise roadmap? We couldn't find it Precisely. So we decided to reach out to researchers and try to construct it.
Yeah. Well, great work, and I mean, I think it's super, super interesting and important as well. So we'll start with some of the questions that we've had in from Slido. One of them from an anonymous name is, can a building, that is high carbon be beautiful anymore, I suppose? Is there scope for that anymore?
No. No, but I don't think that... often when I think like what is beautiful, I always like imagine the moment when, let's say in Britain, the industrialization was like happening, and then you see the chimney that is like puffing the carbon out, and you instantly think that okay, this is where the future is built. Like that's the moment, like that the industrialization is going to change your life. And you want to be that person. So when you see the chimney, you see the machine, you imagine that, or like you get the feeling that this is building my future. And for me, it's the same. Like if I see a windmill somewhere far in the archipelago, I get this feeling that, okay, so this is the green energy. Like this is better than what was before. But if you see like kind of business as usual construction going, you don't get the sensation that okay, this is like someone is building the future here. So in that sense, I don't think like emotionally it can really like be beautiful in that sense. Like it can't really touch maybe anymore.
Yeah. I think this is it, and there's such a consciousness of the need, I think overwhelming now, that the need to act on climate change is huge. But I suppose one of the I don't think the discussions around building and construction are necessarily right in the heart. People talk about, cars and reducing emissions from traveling and planes and stuff like that. I wonder whether you feel, Seinas, that the general public are engaging with this idea of new architecture. I wonder if that's being communicated or how it needs to be communicated.
Well, I think Ines' point of that we need to rethink the aesthetics, we need to rethink the aspirations, we need to rethink so much that will kind of enable and I consider this time of ours to be very like 100 years ago, when we were just kind of in the beginning of the big industrialization that truly transformed completely how we built houses, lived and turned modern. That we are in this same kind of very early stage of a huge transformation that will, I think, develop completely new way of looking at how we live, and I think it's just our assignment as architects and designers that we try to stay open to the new types of aesthetics and lifestyles that could be aspirational and could be part of moving the values. I think it's Jeremy Linth who said culture drives a value that drives behavior, and I think that's kind of wisely said and very spot on your presentation, and I think we need to be part of rethinking the culture.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of the sort of leading on from that. There's a question from Niall, who's from Share Your Green Design, on the values of utopias, conceiving visions not to be constructed. Do you have thoughts on what virtual reality could mean for the exercise, that side of technology?
Yeah, I'm wondering if he's meaning whether the future, the utopia of a future will be virtual, or whether it could work as a tool. I think it can work as a tool, but for me, the problem with virtual things is that they also consume a lot. So it is still kind of this modernistic idea of escaping the confines of the earth and not actually living with the boundaries that we have to live with.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? These also one of the things here in Brussels, and this is is we talk a lot about the digital and the green transition, sort of as separate things often, I think it's discussed about here, and how those things are going to interact. And what we're talking about, what you guys have both said in your presentations, is this idea of the natural world sort of interacting with our physical, personal world as well. And I think this is it. How do we work that out? A question to you, Sinus. I don't know how this... Are all architects now, in the whole of your sort of experience, working on towards the green transitions that we need to? Do you feel everybody in the industry is on board doing the kind of things that you're doing? Or is there still a business as usual in some parts of your sector?
I think that during the last 20 years, it's been a huge change in mindset. But what I also experience, and what is also the case for us as a company, is that it's a long transition, because you need to dig in, you need to really slowly change your way of thinking about things. And I think that's happening, but it's happening in different speeds at different places, which is also, I mean, this is why we have issues like greenwashing or like really weird statements about things that are sustainable while they're really not. It's not, I think, only speculative. It's also the fact that this is a new way of thinking that needs time to mature in the industry. So I don't meet anybody who's against sustainability, but they might be driving it in different speeds or understanding it at different depth. And I think that goes for all industries. Yeah.
So we have a question here as well from the Slido. This is an interesting one as well, because the houses you showed were beautiful and lovely, and it was really interesting what I saw, the sort of house plonked on top of an existing building. And the question here is, do we have ways to convert current buildings so that the systems within them can become more sustainable? Inez, we'll start with you. Do you think that this is, because we're going to have to do that, right? The building stock that exists is going to remain.
I guess I could answer with very technical things like insulation or whatever. But yeah, maybe more interesting is how we use the buildings and how we approach the question whether we need a new building or whether we could just kind of use the ones we have differently. And that's also where kind of the cultural shift comes in, how to make staying in the old place interesting for the people. How do you use design to kind of make it feel that it's it is something that is for you and not just the old thing. But yeah, I don't know, Sinus, if you want to add on that.
No, I think there's so many opportunities, but it's actually more feasible financially to tear down old buildings and then build new ones. But I think we need to kind of incorporate the currency of carbon into that type of budgeting as well, because then you might get to a different result, that it does make sense to keep structures that are already have emitted carbon when they were constructed 50 or 100 years ago, and managed to reuse them. But also renovation is complex, and it's a separate chapter on how to ensure healthy buildings in old building stocks.
Yeah, one of my questions when you were giving your presentation was about the cost, to be honest. What is the difference in cost in building one of these houses that is done on, the best sort of sustainable, as you said, with available products, compared to perhaps the existing ways that we've been building houses?
Yeah, it's one of the kind of chapters I didn't bring today was that we're actually also working on value engineering, because if we want this to scale, it needs to be affordable, and we're down at a cost of around 1,500 euros per square meter, which is in Denmark it's pretty decent. It's quite low, and I think, of course, that cost would be different in other regions of of Europe, but we have gotten to a place where it's not significantly more expensive than building a concrete house with elements and brick on the side.
Yeah.
Which is important.
Yeah, exactly. This is the thing. Also, one of the realities is as the market towards more sustainable materials grows, there will be more competition that can then. That's the way the market works, right? So, there is a question here for you from somebody called Isabella Rubino. She says, "How does the material choice play an active role in indoor climate and health? And does using this as a point of departure become useful for reducing CO2? This is kind of for you, I think.
Yeah, well, a lot of the materials that we use and the paints and surface surfacing that we use is actually pretty toxic. So there's a quite meaningful projection of what looks to be sustainable to what's also healthy. And then again, it's never that simple. There are also types of timber that emit gases inside the homes, but in general, going from towards natural materials is also enabling a healthy indoor climate. But it's also around like ensuring that you have enough ventilation, that there's daylight and access to outdoor spaces.
Yeah.
Basically making indoors a little bit more like the outdoors.
Yeah, and it's what people want to live in nowadays as well, frankly. Are there any questions in the room? There's a few, well, there's a lot more on the maybe you've been doing them from here. Okay, so we'll wrap this up. We're running out of time, but there's a question that I wanted to touch on quickly. And this was, how can we all get on board, Inez? Nordic country, we're here as part of the Nordic Council, etc. And you guys are fantastic at this kind of thing. Great at design, great at thinking forward thinking, and years ahead of the rest of Europe, let alone the rest of the world. How can we get this message further out and sort of project what you guys are doing elsewhere?
I'm always thinking that not everyone has to make the same mistakes. Like, you don't have to go through all the steps. Like, if I would be sending posts, like letters, now, I wouldn't start faxing next, but I would take the smartphone. So I think that whoever, anywhere in the world, comes up with a vision that is more tempting and more inspiring than the fossil consumer society, people will want to be part of that. Like, they will want the change. And it's not really that tricky to consume a bit less of the natural resources, but it needs to be tempting.
So what you're saying is that the Nordic should shine a light and everybody else will try and emulate it because it works for them, basically.
Anyone can shine the light.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to wrap that up there. We're out of time for our Q&A section, but I want to thank both of you so much. Firstly, for your super interesting speeches, your presentations, and also for joining in the Q&A. We will have you back up a bit later. I can grab the microphones from you. Thank you so much. A hand for our speakers. Okay, so as you can see, our dancers are returning. They're getting ready again. And just a huge thanks. So now we're gonna turn our event to talk more about the funding. We did speak about. Sorry, are you okay? Yeah. So we're going to turn now, firstly, to Maya Ferk, who's from the Laudes Foundation, who's going to give us a presentation, and we're going to have our dancers Samule and Clara back as well. So I'll hand you a microphone. I think they're both working.
Yeah, thank you.
And the floor's yours.
Thank you so much. So I feel it's really good for me to stand up. So would you mind just standing up? Because I'm sure we all kind of need it. You're probably better at this than I am. But if you feel with me, just getting the energy back in the body before I'll run you through a marathon of systems change. Cool, thank you. The next 20 minutes, I'll talk about how the heck we change a system as complex as the built environment. So thank you so much for having me here. We already covered the 40% of emissions that buildings are responsible for globally, but we talked a lot today about new buildings. And basically what we need to be aware of when we're talking about systemic changes, we don't have a lot of empty field for new buildings. We actually have 90% of all of the buildings we have here today will still be there in 2050, which is good. That's what we need. But it's also challenging in terms of the transition, because it means that we need to renovate 220 million buildings a year in Europe, requiring astonishing amount of 275 billion euro investment yearly. That's a lot. And today, we are renovating, but we're not renovating enough. So we have a renovation rate of 1% of European buildings across EU. We need to get to a minimum of 3% to become just getting close to becoming Paris aligned. So the challenge is great. And talking about renovations, we don't just need to get the renovation rate up, we also need to get it right, because we need to make sure that the carbon payback periods are as short as possible, that we use the right materials and as little materials as possible with the right processes, so that we don't risk blowing carbon budgets in the short term just because we're not properly measuring it. So far, I've only talked about carbon, but systems change in the built environment is so much more. And I warned you that I was going to talk about a ladder. This is even a more complex ladder. And I think systems change, we need to be aware that there's a human element into this. We're talking about a super complex change we need to enable. But also we need to be aware that we're humans, and we only take human steps one at a time. And here we are starting to take steps in terms of operational energy, in terms of embodied carbon. We're starting to view this more and more as a collective in terms of the total impact of buildings. But we need to get so much further, and we need to start looking much more into nature-based solutions, circular economies, efficiency, regeneration, and that's only on the climate side. Then we have the whole social side as well, where we need to start looking at things like justice, things like human right for shelter and housing, things like health, safety, community, and power balance. So, yeah, we need to stop only having a tunnel vision on carbon. We need to stop using circular economy as a blind argument for continuing the growth that we have today. And we need to start understanding the social impacts of the decarbonization we need to see, because the transition of the built environment has to be just, or there is no transition. So basically, as we see it in Laudes, circular economy is a prerequisite for the built environment to become Paris aligned, because it's a way that we can start measuring and taking into account the externalities of our actions into what we do every day. My name is Maya Ferg, as said. I'm from the Laudes Foundation. It's a private philanthropy based in Amsterdam, looking at the whole of Europe. And really, we're responding to a dual crisis of climate change and social inequality. And we're doing that because we see climate change and social inequality as the physical manifestations of what is a broken economic system. Our mission is to support brave action, to challenge and inspire industry to harness its power for good, with a vision of enabling global markets that value people and respect nature. And we have 3 different programs that are trying to achieve this humble vision through fashion, built environment, and finance and capital markets. And naturally, I'm from the built environment talking today. In the built environment program, what we're striving for is a regenerative and inclusive built environment that prioritizes decarbonization for everyone. And here we're really trying to approach it as a systemic change we need to see. Moving from setting industry pathways, working with industry on how this just decarbonization will happen, which should hopefully become a positive ambition loop into policy making and shifting rules, because we need to get all of the industry with us. We need to accelerate investments. I just talked about the numbers. So how do we work with investors to shift mindsets and shift investments? We need to shift power to enable a just transition. We need to start putting the human and the nature in the center of our decision making. And then all of that is material neutral, but to get to a Paris-aligned built environment, we do need to scale the use of bio-based materials, specifically the use of timber. Hence, we have one intervention on accelerating timber called Built by Nature. I already talked about how challenging and complex this system really is. It's not just about changing one small industry. It's about interfering with the industry of energy, construction, mobility, jobs, legal, finance, health, etc. And the way that we're looking at it from a systemic change perspective is we need to change mindsets, to change rules, to change power. And so I'll talk a little bit about what we're seeing here in terms of changing mindsets, rules, and power. And we talked about earlier, what is the European Bauhaus movement? And for me, I don't know, but for me, I see it as a way of trying to change mindsets so that we can change the rules and the power. Because what is it, a mindset shift we need to see? We need to move from looking at quantity to looking at quality. And here, we need to start asking ourselves the right questions. One of the other present speakers also talked about that. We need to ask, is construction the answer? How do we maximize the space utilization we already have? And how do we improve our design criteria? How do we improve our material efficiency? And how do we avoid waste? And if we need to build new, then we can start talking about bio-based materials and how we scale this. And here, Laudes Foundation has launched a new initiative called Built by Nature that's really supporting frontrunners across Europe to clarify how we accelerate the use of timber in the built environment, but making sure that we do it in the right way, because we have to get this transition right. We cannot just close our eyes and scale the use of timber. We need to make sure that in that process we protect nature. Another part of changing mindsets is the financialization of housing. Buildings have become an asset class. We don't look at them as the original purpose of creating shelter for human lives. We look at them as a financial asset class on a financial sheet that has to create a specific return on investments. And we have to change that mindset. There's a whole industry that's living out of creating data. And while there's no doubt, as Sinus also pointed out, we need more and we need better data, we also need to make sure that we're not ending up in an analysis paralysis where we cannot actually do anything when some of the solutions out there are very easy and already existing. One of the ways of not just ending up not doing anything is Green Finance Institute is working on property-linked finance. So rather than me as a person taking a loan, how do we start linking that finance to the renovation to my building rather than me as a person, so that we can start scaling financial flows into the buildings that we need to see rather than into people. Another way is, how do we get carbon into the financial sheets? What if we started really looking at companies as climate insolvent if they are not able to raise the funding they need to raise to become net zero compliant? Then, well, they're yesterday. They're not relevant anymore. Climate Kick is working, we're supporting Climate Kick on doing 2 deep demonstrations in Milan and Madrid to really start looking at how do we enable this shift from a specific demonstrations where they're working with policymakers, with finance, with industry, and with the communities to shift mindsets. And here, it's been super interesting to see. They went out, talked to the architectural school, and here students said, well, bricks and concrete is probably a good thing because it lasts long. And this really shows that while mindsets are changing, we need more. And then we need to stop only looking at buildings from a single unit perspective, but start looking at it across the system. Because the built environment sprawl is increasing. We're taking up more and more land with our buildings, and we're under-occupying the buildings, the space that we already have, and we have too many empty buildings today that we're not properly utilizing. So last, in terms of changing mindsets, is actually it is they are changing. Our mindsets are changing. Now we just talked about what's happening in the Nordics. We mapped out what's happening on circular economy in the built environment across Europe. And yes, a lot of things are happening. So that's really good. Mindsets are shifting, but they're not scaling fast enough. And we need to see that, which is why we need to start changing rules so that we can get the whole industry with us. And here, I would say, luckily, this is just an overview of what the EU Commission is working on. And as you see, they're quite busy trying to change the rules of the system. So that's good. We have the EPBD, the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, which looks like it's gonna start recognizing that we need to measure on whole life cycle carbon. We have the EU taxonomy is really recognizing circular economy. We are moving. Will it get us to where we need to go? We still need front runners to set the bar higher, definitely, but it is moving. Same thing goes for member states, where we see increasing member states regulating on whole life cycle carbon, at least setting a requirement for measurements, but also setting performance requirements. And this is what we need to scale the change. World Green Building Council 2 weeks ago launched an EU roadmap on how to decarbonize the built environment on a whole life cycle perspective. And here, really, we see that they're putting data, they're putting circular economy, they're putting whole life cycle carbon on the agenda through a very collaborative process with really strong backup. We also work with Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance, has gathered 12 cities across Europe to really look at how cities can play a role in decarbonizing the built environment, starting to regulate on embodied carbon and circularity and timber. And then sufficiency. Because Global ABC launched a report that shows that yes, we are actually decreasing the amount of energy per square meter, but as long as we increase the amount of square meters, we're nowhere. So we need to look at the amount of square meters and how we use those square meters based on reducing the floor area per capita, based on prioritizing the use of empty buildings, based on allowing for adaptability and shifting a status from ownership to usership, to access rather than to own. But as I said, all of this change will not be sustainable if we don't have social support. We need to make sure that this is done with and for the many. In Laudes, we have a saying, it's nothing about us without us. We need to have the right voices at the table. And here, what we see in the built environment is we have a project and then we involve people somewhere in the end. Sometimes we do involve people, but more so because we're not actually including them in the decision making. Maybe they're listened to, but not taken properly into account. And that needs to change. We're working with IHRB, Institute for Human Rights and Business, to really put the just transition on the agenda. Because one of the reasons why, when I walked around down there, the guy who was supposed to be speaking about European Bauhaus, he was talking about oceans. And he was talking about farming. And I was like, what? I thought we were talking about the built environment. And I think that's because we're not really making it relevant for people, despite of the relevance of these shelters that we all spend all of our lives inside. But then it's also about how we make the transition possible. 160,000 green new jobs could be created through the EU renovation wave. But if the jobs do not have at least the same quality as they have today, and you can question the quality of jobs in the construction sector, then the transition won't happen. And here we're working with Builders and Woodworkers International, a trade union, to really start engaging and demystifying the transition of the built environment with workers. But it's not just the workers, it's also us using buildings. And here we're starting to see new ways of ownership, where this is a picture of a community land trust in London, where the community owns and operates the buildings rather than investors. So really putting that human aspect to the center, and they're currently investigating whether that actually means better carbon footprint. We don't know yet. We have an assumption. We'll see. That's going to be exciting. And the last example I'll take in terms of shifting power is the tax system. We need to change the tax system. Right now, we're taxing labor rather than taxing resources. And here, one of our partners, X-Tax, is really looking at how could we actually really scale the circular economy if we started taxing resources more and labor less? And what would that mean in terms of the just transition? So that's completely rethinking the system, but super exciting. So last point from me today is, I don't know how I think we're all working on the transition, and I think we can all recognize this frustration of running in circles. We're talking and what's happening, and the carbon emissions are still rising. But I do believe that this is actually the real picture, that while we are going in circles, what we see happening in the EU, in member states, what we see from amazing examples that we also heard about today, change is happening. We just have to push further and more and harder. Thank you.
A huge thank you, Maya. That was a really lovely way to end your speech, that sort of idea of extending the spiral up there. Okay, so without further ado, I'll bring Louise Keller-Roper up. She is going to continue our conversation, and we'll have a Q&A with Maya at the end. Just a reminder to everybody, you can drop your questions into the Slido. The hashtag is 9622, and we'll put some of those questions to our speakers afterwards. Floor's yours, Louise.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
It feels very low. Thank you, Clara, for dancing. I'm going to try not to look at you too much, but hopefully that will help. So thank you for having me. I am not an architect or a designer. I work with business, and today we've been hearing lots about how design and architecture can help drive the change in society. And I've been asked to talk about how business can be part of that change. My name is Louise, and I'm the CEO of Volans. We're a boutique think tank and advisory based in London, but working globally. And really, a lot of my day job is figuring out how to transition big businesses and use business as a source of good change in the world. So I'm going to find the clicker. Is that right? Yeah. So business traditionally had one purpose, really, to make profit, to pay shareholders, and still to this day, much as change is happening, most businesses are focused on success in terms of shareholder dividends and in terms of growth. And back in 2018, we at Volans started an inquiry. We called it Tomorrow's Capitalism Inquiry. It was backed by a lot of the forward-thinking businesses, Unilever, Viva Investors, Covestro, and so on. And the question we asked was, how can businesses be catalysts for systemic change? And Maya set the scene beautifully, so I don't have to go into what systemic change is. But one of the key things that came up for us was that whilst the focus not just on profit, but on people and planet is still very valid, that's been going on for a while, the only way for that to really drive systemic change is if we use further lenses that we're calling the 3 Rs: responsibility, resilience, and regeneration. So I'm going to just take you through what those 3 R's really mean for us and how we've worked on that. And then I'm going to give an example of a business we've been working with who have tied their colours to the flagpole of regeneration, and what are the problems, what are the challenges, and what are the huge opportunities for business in that. So first, responsibility. Business has worked on change agenda basically for 50 years, since the Limit to Growth report. There's been green consumers, there's been corporate social responsibility, and yet, whilst companies are looking at minimizing their negative impact on the world, they're putting it in beautiful glossy reports. They're being indexed on the Dow Jones or the Corporate Knights Index. There's a lot of competition, a lot of PR going on. Really, and we're even seeing 5,000 B Corps. B Corps, if you don't know, is companies that have committed in their statutes to look after all stakeholders evenly. So not just shareholders, but nature, employees, local communities, and even the future in some cases. And the truth is, we need sustainable business, and we need to limit negative impacts. But really, while they're slowing down this harmful drive we are having towards the cliff edge of climate change and social inequality, they're not turning that car around and preventing us from danger. We might be slowing down a little bit. So while, in a sense, it's been a success, more businesses are working on this, really, and we've seen a lot of stats today that are quite depressing, but I'm just going to add one more. This came out in June, and basically the carbon dioxide is now 421 parts per million. And just for context, the society we've set up, it's been between 250 and 380, I think, has been sort of what this society can take. So we are way, way over. And the next one. And the other stat that shocked me quite recently, even though it's a 2020 article in Nature, is that man-made mass is now more than biomass on planet Earth. So, which to me is staggering. So man-made, concrete, aggregate, steel is more than biomass or life. And for me, that took a little while just to sink in. And whilst, whether we like it or not, this has an impact. And climate change, whether you believe in it or not, and I'm sure this audience believes in it, but honestly, I meet a lot of business people who are still not quite sure that this is actually as serious as we're all making it out to be. They are having to deal with the effects of what we've done. So with droughts, with floods, with heat waves in India of 50 degrees and more, with a global pandemic, with a war. But really what has happened is that, without wanting to, resilience has come to the fore. Business are focusing so much on a resilience mindset. And in a sense, that's fantastic, because it means we are now looking at how do we mitigate the risks that are coming from our previous actions. How are we trying to adapt? These are the sponge cities in China. I don't know if anybody's seen them, but they're amazing. And this is where a huge example of how design architecture can help with some of this adaptation. Similarly, we know that the Indonesian government are moving their capital city because Jakarta is drowning or sinking by 25 centimeters a year. That's quite a lot. I saw there was a campaign in my home country of Denmark recently, which had the benches 80 centimeters higher than normal benches in public parks to show where Copenhagen is likely to land if we keep going where we are. So resilience is a really important lens to have. And at the moment, a lot of funds are pouring into this, partly because all the things I mentioned earlier, and we've talked about the floods, the war, etc., have shown how fragile really our global supply chains are. And businesses have been relying on global supply chains for years and years and years. So we might assume that if we can just get a little bit more sustainable every year, then resilience will come. We will stop creating these issues and so on. But what we can see from the past few decades is that that's not the case. We have become more sustainable, and yet we need more and more resilience. So from my work and the think tank work we've done and the work we've done with business, it's really clear that resilience cannot be achieved in the long term if we don't take a really, really different approach, and a regenerative approach. Because living systems, and we are all in a living system, they're not ultimately regenerative and resilient because they sustain. They're resilient because they regenerate. Sustainability really is stagnation, whereas regeneration is flourishing. And we need to aim for restoring, and we need to aim for regenerating. So we can't just keep aiming at sustainability. That time has gone for us. So, third R, regeneration. Just to be really clear, this is what I mean when I say regeneration. Creating the conditions for all life to flourish and renew infinitely. And I love that Ines had the infinity loop on her slides, because I use that all the time. I think you had it as well, didn't you? So, like, we're all looking at this. It has to be a system that can just continue to renew. And that is as far as you can imagine from let's do responsible business and minimize the impact we might have on the external world. This is really different. And whilst regeneration has been a science for years, especially biological science, the business of regeneration is really emergent. Companies are saying that they're going to be regenerative. Big companies like the US giant Walmart, Nestle, those kinds of companies. But nobody has the answers yet. And so what I'm going to do is just to go through and this example. Again, it's emergent and not so much. But first of all, I should just 3 core design principles. So if regeneration is about life, and living systems is about 3 really core things. One is learning from nature, biomimicry often called, which has been used again in architecture for years and years. But really it's all about taking the advantage that nature has had 3.8 billion years to try and work out solutions, and ignoring that has been at our peril, and we have to stop and we have to take that on. Secondly, circularity. So in the title of our event today, really how I think about it is its flows. It's flows that go through that system, whether that's water, energy, waste, and so on. And the circular economy has certainly helped us move forward, but it isn't enough, as Maya said. And the third one is a little bit different. It's alignment of inner and outer, that you can't really be regenerative unless you're doing what you are being. So you can't say, oh, we're going to be really regenerative outwardly and then not create flourishing the internal of your organization. And that actually, for most businesses, is a really challenging thing. Because if you can say it's out there and you can act with your customers, then that's one thing. But taking it into your culture, shifting the mindsets of everybody in your organization and all your partners, that's a whole different story. So just a very quick look. This is a slightly adapted diagram from Regenerative group, and just to talk about the movement from degenerative to regenerative. You've got, goes through conventional, green, sustainable in the middle with the SDGs. And what we see is that companies, because the SDGs have been so powerful, they're a really good bridge to moving towards regeneration. And you're moving from a mechanistic view of the system to a living system. So it's not static, it's constantly dynamic, it's really complicated and messy. And you have to understand the feedback loops that are going on. But really, if you can do this, you're moving from a mindset of risk and cost to one of opportunity and value creation, and much broader value creation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this, the company we're working with, and try and give some ideas of what it means in practice. Oh, right. So it's a Spanish company, not a Nordic one, sorry. And I don't know if you know it, it's a global infrastructure solutions group. They have about 40,000 employees, 40 countries, about 8.5 billion revenue turnover a year and so on. So quite a big deal, this company. And just to really preface, I'm going to say this several times, they do not have all the answers. This is not a case study in being perfect. This is interesting because they're trying. And we're all hopefully going to be able to learn from what they're doing. So they work in construction, transport, water, waste management, energy, agriculture, and forestry. I'm going to focus more on the infrastructure because it's slightly easier. And they have been a leader in responsible sustainability, I want to call it, for years. They've had a tagline of business as unusual. They've aligned their whole business portfolio to the EU taxonomy, to the SDGs, done all the right things. And we then ran a program of work with them, and it's been going on for 2.5 years now, I think, almost 3 years, of what does it look like to be a leader in the future? So, they're quite brave. They're family-owned, which makes it easier to say, what does this look like if we want to continue to lead? And I got very excited because I think this is a kind of industry, your industry actually, that's foundational for everything else. And if we can move infrastructure, architecture, and design, then everything else will follow. I think Inez particularly made a brilliant argument for that's what creates the values, not just in necessarily our homes or our societies, but also in how business is done. What's the environment? They are now looking at their progression like this, just really briefly. This is one of their slides, it's not that pretty. That they had a plan in 2010 that was very responsible. But what they're seeing and the arguments they're finding is that moving from just commitment and compliance to towards having a substantial contribution in the world with real impact will take them from risk into an opportunity space that they just haven't imagined. And so far, that's what all the signs are. So again, how are they doing that? They are basically focusing very heavily. I think there's another slide. There you go. They are focusing very heavily on local context. So taking the view that if you can go very deep on the local area, really understand it, and the lenses we helped them develop was financial, economic, demographic, social, environmental, of course, and biodiversity, and aesthetics. If those lenses are looked at in depth in a local area before you start, then you can establish the right partnerships to regenerate the whole place. The economy, and this is a slide that was used with the World Bank the other day, so it says economy quite a lot. But really, you can start making a difference and regenerating life potential, really, for the people there. And a couple of people have referred to it, partnerships with local people, partnerships that actually will build capacity in that local area. And the one big thing, and I don't think it's on the slide, is they had to take a really different long-term view. So instead of thinking, right, we're coming in, we're going to build a bridge here. So we had a case study with Madrid. Madrid would like another bridge here. But if you really look at the context, then that area of Madrid really, in 10 years' time, would not suit a bridge because Madrid is about to be 10 degrees hotter in general. So having a bridge, even if you made the bridge a bit bigger, then you would increase the pollution, which, of course, in extreme heats, is much, much, much more dangerous for local population. So just taking, that's a very basic example, but just taking some of those deeper, more time to look at what's the future going to need, what will future generations need in that area has been really helpful. And how they did it internally, and that's when the difficulties come in. They had to basically equip their own teams with what is regeneration, why are we trying to do this? But further than that, we've just delivered a playbook for their business development teams. So how does a business development guy from Acciona start having different conversations with a local council who thinks they need something? different conversations, ask different questions, because those people are actually also in silos. There's not a lot of joined up. So it's a real challenge. And the internal training has been huge, and it's literally just, I think it's still just starting. It's been going on for a few months, but there's a lot more to do there. And similarly, training and informing the rest of the world, because right now there aren't any, I don't think, maybe Sinas will tell me differently, but there aren't any tenders that say, oh, we would very much like a regenerative approach to this, please. Most of the KPIs are cost, time, maybe circular materials, maybe carbon, but really not a holistic view at all. And so what they've done is they've gone and done a roadshow to all the multilateral development banks across the world to say, okay, this is the future, this is why you should be helping to fund this. They're doing similar things with clients and creating it as collaborative projects, pre-competitive in theory, not really pre-competitive actually, but the need for collaboration is so huge. And this of course is in addition to the sort of innovative circular solutions they bring, sort of multifunctional infrastructure where a road might carry water or a bridge might have biodiversity additions because it's got grass roofing or those types of things I'm taking for granted. This is the next step. It's beyond the product thing. It's about the mindset. It's about the network around it. And actually what they're seeing is that the business opportunities in the long term will be a much, much, much better return on investment than their previous business models. But it's hard, and they're really not doing it everywhere yet. I just want to emphasize that because the last thing you want to do is put them up as that, because it's fine investing and so on, but actually, and somebody mentioned greenwashing earlier, I can't remember who that was, but that idea of, maybe it was Jack, the companies that are the front runners often get criticized more, scrutinized more, and they should be if they're making massive claims, but sometimes that can really be a barrier to how much business is going to fund and come to the brilliant architects and ask for these projects. So the way that we're talking about de-risking this, particularly for Acciona, but also for other companies in other sectors, is you have to have a collaboration of an industry and people need to move together. And that's a very different mindset for especially the commercial guys and the business development guys than it has been for the last couple of years. I shall change the slide. So just briefly, when we talk about traditional versus sustainable versus regenerative infrastructure, really it's about the long-term aspect. It's about this idea that if you are building, maintaining, and then exiting, versus building, nurturing for a much longer period of time, then it's about stewardship and taking responsibility beyond what would be normal now. And the other piece is around that value, that you have to be able to extend your timelines. And Maya mentioned the financial systems. It's really important that investors take that longer view as well. Otherwise, this really, really won't happen. So, just gonna. So how? Just the main learnings have been that for the future, if business is going to help change the world how we need it to, they need to take a much more place or context-based view. Doesn't mean that anti-globalization in that sense, but it does mean a difference than what we've seen. It's not just let's shore it back from China because there was a pandemic to Czechoslovakia, that's fine. Really having to look at what are you building, how are you building supply chains and so on. And then that much longer term view that I've kept talking about, and lastly, collaboration. Collaboration with people we don't normally see. I'm slightly on an obsession with talking about stakeholders. Actually, we're all stakeholders. The CEO we're talking about is also normally a dad and an investor, and he has a pension fund. And we have to start engaging as whole human beings, because if we don't do that, we won't get there. I think do I have one more question? No. So back to the question I was asked. I hope I haven't taken too long. But how can business accelerate the change, the systems change we need? Well, the first thing they can do is break out from that definition of the purpose of a business that I started with. The Milton Friedman, the purpose of business is creating a profit and looking after shareholders. Business has to be an active participant in every aspect of society. Stop worrying too much about being political, but actually help push for the rules as we want to see them in the future. And really, they have to be activist. And there we are, last one, I think. Not just for moral reasons, but for self-interest. The business case for businesses to be activists is staggering. This is the only way to survive. And being activist, as I said, means involved in each of the points of the system that you possibly can, and not stopping the conversations even though it's uncomfortable. A lot of people I know who work in sustainability and regeneration won't have the conversations because it's a bit uncomfortable, because actually we're asking everybody to change how they do business, how they live, maybe do a bit less, buy a bit less, have a smaller house or a better house designed by effect. And there you go. So business has an obligation, both to their shareholders, but also to future generations, to be activist. And I guess for the rest of us, we have to do the same. That's all I have. Thank you.
So a huge thank you to Louise. I'll ask you to stay. Clara, I'll ask you to stay as well. And I think we'll bring Samuele up as well. This is the end of the dancing. And I think that's been, for me, certainly, a really interesting aspect to this. It's in the spirit of the Bauhaus. We were interested as to how it would work out, and I think it's been absolutely gorgeous. So thank you so much. So thanks so much for being with us. I will ask Maya to return to the stage as well, and I'll just move. Yes, pop that up. I've got a microphone for you here. So we are slightly running out of time, but we'll get to as many questions as we possibly can. So bear with me. I think one of the things that's been I've been thinking as all of our speakers have been speaking, and one of the things I've liked about this event, and I've done a lot of events on sustainability, green issues, stuff like this, is that what all four of our speakers have said is that change actually has to mean change. We actually have to not just do things in a different way, but live our lives in a different way as well. And I think that's one of the things that's really important, is we sort of think about these big issues, how are we going to have this climate, how are we going to get climate neutral? Well, it means that we have to live in a different way. Right, so we've got some questions. The first one is to you, Louise. If the goal of a corporation is to make money and cost efficiency, and cost efficiency does not yet go hand in hand with ecology, is it realistic to assume companies will change?
So, first of all, I don't think we should assume that cost efficiency doesn't go hand in hand with ecology. I think that's where timescale comes in. That over time, it will be much better. So that's the first thing to say. And secondly, really, if you're going to be successful in the future, we have to have a future. Mm-hmm.
That's an important and simple point.
It's really quite basic. Lots of companies are waiting, hoping that something's going to happen. I think we talked about the tech. Oh, yes. Technology is going to save us. And technology is doing amazing things and will help. But there is both a self-interested and a moral argument for shifting that. And the tools now, really. You can change your statute, so on. Do you have anything else?
If I can build on that, it's also risk management. Yeah. Because as I talked about the externalities that we need to put into our financial books, if we don't, you don't probably manage the risks of your company's future. Yeah. It's coming. We do see carbon pricing. We see the emissions trading systems that did not go through.
Not a very good day yesterday on that. Yeah.
But hopefully, probably it will in another round. So it's about risk management at the end of the day.
Yeah, I found that really interesting, actually. Yesterday in the European Parliament, there was a vote on these issues, and it wasn't a success, shall we say. And a lot of people are, crisis and chaos. Well, actually, maybe This is part of what we need to do. We need to have these big fights and battles. Some are voting it down because they don't want, they're not so believing of climate change, and others are because it's not ambitious enough. So it's an interesting time we're going through here in the EU for sure. The next question we've got here is who's not in the room? Who are we missing from making some of this much needed change? Maya, I'll start with you.
So can I say the financial institutions?
You can.
I don't think
Yeah.
we have the financial institutions here. And what we really see, and also when we were mapping what is the status of circular economy across Europe, we see that architects are leading the way. It is the designers that are leading, and Europe is pushing a lot of funding out to develop the supply. The supply is emerging, it is developing, but we cannot get the supply to where it needs to get without increased demand.
Oh.
So we need the financial institutions in this room, and so our theory is to really work with finance to require change, demand change. But what we see is they only look at energy.
When you're talking about financial institutions, that's a big. Which financial institutions, in your opinion, aren't engaging properly?
So, well, they're all trying to approach, but not sure how to. So, for example, we look at mortgages. So, with the new EU taxonomy, the mortgage, which is 50% of the European GDP, needs to become taxonomy compliant. So, the banks are now starting to lean in, but how they're going to change the system is a big question. Then you have public finance, and then you have big institutional investors who I think more are leading the way. But yeah, it's...
Can I add a little bit?
Please, absolutely.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And so I'm one of the founders of the Bankers for Net Zero in the UK, and the banks don't know how. Really, they are not market makers. They're used to investing or divesting, not at being advisors. And actually, that's what we're asking of them, in a sense, that they need to understand the issues, and their transformation is just as big as any of the companies. It still needs to be a lot faster, and they have a lot less excuse than companies who are putting in 50-year investments in, I don't know, chemical crackers. You know, banks can move faster, but they're a little bit lost.
So how do we do this? How do we find them? Is there a layer of advisorship? There needs to be new institutional bodies to support these banks. I mean, they'll invest if they think there's profit in it. That's the reality of banks.
No. And actually, it comes back to Maya's point earlier that risk management, they now have to start reporting on this.
Yeah.
So that has to just turn up the heat of the regulatory and mandates, really.
Yeah.
And there is a huge amount of organizations trying to support. We're working with Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials, trying to really show what is the carbon accounting in your financial sheets. That was a banking initiative to begin with. There's the Institute for Institutional Investors Group for Climate Change, really working with institutional investors on how to decarbonize. There's Climate Action 100+, all working with. So there is a really big movement here, but still a movement where the financial institutions still tend to stay with their friends discussing the challenges, and we need that, like you said, collaboration, that cross-border understanding, because if financial institutions start really seeing what's possible, then I think we can also move them faster.
They have no assets. No, they have assets, but not physical assets.
Exactly. This is what I was saying about change meaning change. Like the banks actually have to change. It has to be a different thing. One of the things that was really interesting in your speech, Maya, that you mentioned was this idea of climate insolvency. Now that is an admirable idea, but would be, fought over. The reality of it is that climate insolvency would affect pretty much every household name, brand, big business that we know in every sector. How would you expect to get that over the line politically?
I don't think we will. But I think, so in all negotiations, you have to not ask for what you want, you have to ask for more. And I think if we start putting climate insolvency, which is actually it's real.
It seems logical when you think about it. Like
it's real. The same, why don't we look at carbon payback periods when we look at investment payback periods? It's so we need to start using the language to really be able to understand what's happening. And then probably we won't get there, but yeah, we'll set the bar and then we'll meet somewhere.
Yeah, I really like that. No, we've got a question. So how do we push regenerative change in construction where long chains of subcontracting are so common, meaning sort of out of reach? This is actually a huge issue in this sector. This sort of, it's quite far down the line and, I don't have that responsibility. How do we change that, Louise?
Well, I think that's where the responsibility piece comes in that we have got very, very good at looking at supply chains and monitoring and working not just with direct suppliers, but far down. It's not easy. Like, none of this is going to be easy. And we're all, carbon insolvent and climate insolvent and probably justice insolvent too. But that's all there is. I was with a company last week, and they were looking at, particularly in southern, some of their southern contractors, they were looking at using AI and not even smartphones, base phones, to pull the contractors, workers, so that they could make sure that that the standards were upheld, and that there always was a way for workers who might have been mistreated or something not being quite right, they could get to that. So that's again where technology can really, really help. But it's willingness and taking, making the effort to do it and then finding the right way.
Yeah,
Please. We're working with the Chancellor Lane project to develop contractual clauses, because you need to require the collaboration, otherwise it won't happen. You need to incentivize it. But if anyone in the audience has another idea, it's one of those that we haven't in our systemic. How the heck do we enable collaboration? We know that it's central, we know that it's needed, but how? I think it's a really good question.
Yeah, exactly. And this is essentially the point in doing this, right? This is the point in having this Bauhaus, so that people that are involved and interested and informed can share those ideas. We are running out of time a little bit, unfortunately. There's a question, please, sir. Yes, there's a microphone coming behind you. Please give your name and who you are.
Hi, I'm Martin Snyder, Circular Economy Orchestrator with Climate Kick.
Wonderful.
And it's not a question, it's a possible answer to your question. And the possible answer is within the transition to a circular economy. And when I say a circular economy, I'm not referring to recycling in a linear context, but truly into a circular economy where value chains as such are not owners anymore of the raw materials that they buy or the semi-finished products that they that they create, but that they are adding value to raw materials into an end product, yes, and that the value chain sells a service, yes, which means that if that service at a certain point fails, it's the responsibility not of an individual actor within a value chain, it's the responsibility of the entire value chain, yes? And that creates also an incentive for that specific value chain to produce not only sustainably, but regeneratively, as we speak. So I think the solution is in that direction.
Thank you.
Super interesting, thank you.
There you go. Really interesting idea. Yeah. Okay. So as I say, we'll do something we had planned. I'll ask Ines and Sinus to come back up into the up with us. One of the things we wanted to do as part of this event. Yeah, come and join us on the stage. Just quickly, and again, sort of in the spirit of the Bauhaus sort of responsibility personally, the question is: what do we do? What do you do individually? What is valuable for you in your own personal life when we're looking at sustainability and how you live your own life? Maya or Louise, you've got a microphone, so I'll let you go first.
I'm horrible.
You are?
Yeah, I think so. I think we need to do less. I do consume less. I don't eat meat. I try, but I fly. I travel, and I think Can I just say that I actually hate the question?
Yeah. No. I knew you were going to hate it.
I think it's an Al Gore movement that is personalizing the carbon emission. And basically what we see is, we see that the industry needs to change and the system needs to change. And that definitely is linked to my behavior, and my behavior needs to change as well.
Yeah.
But we just can't use it as a distraction from the change we really need to see.
You've kind of killed my section here, but we're going to carry on. No, I appreciate it. I think it's really important, and I think that's the right answer to be elicited.
Well, given Maya has killed the question and the section, I'll just go in a slightly different direction, if that's all right.
Do it.
So what I think we really need to make this actually happen is, and I think you mentioned it, Jack, earlier, the connection to nature, but not just connection to nature, connection to each other. Is what and I do try and do it in my everyday life when I can, but really encouraging that instead of seeing ourselves as separate, whether individuals, companies, and so on, we are part of this system. Because several people have talked about mindset change, but unless we really are connected to each other and spend time being present for each other, not being on our smartphones and other things, then that's never going to happen. And I think that is actually the weird key, as well as doing what we can and so on. But also we have to stop consumer companies trying to blame consumers for buying their stuff, right?
Yeah.
So anyway.
No. I think it's really interesting. And actually, sort of coming off what you've said there, one of the things, again, that I think all four of you in some way suggested is the need for sort of localization of responsibility.
Yeah.
And when that localization happens, then perhaps we have a more personal responsibility. But until the system changed, we can't do that, I think, probably.
Well, we can, right? That's the thing to do, is to start acting locally and connecting locally, so we can't wait for the system. But you're right,
for your local system rather than sort of some huge international global.
Yeah, because that's just overwhelming. That's why so many, especially young people, have climate anxiety, because they're trying to take responsibility for the whole thing rather than what they can actually act on.
Yeah, Ines.
First of all, I don't think Maya is horrible. Because I mean,
she is the opposite of horrible, exactly.
No, but I mean, Louise, you were also discussing like how it is straining to work with sustainability, and I think that is like in itself already a big step to do, that you do decide to use your time, use your career, and use your personality or you as a person in the change, like you want to be the change. So I think that is a big thing that you actually can do, and what we are doing or trying to do.
And finally.
Yeah, well, I'm glad I'm the last one here. But I actually kind of following up on what you said, Louisa, I think this transition of getting connected in different ways is a very kind of mental transition. I think a good example is food. We did change our food habits radically over the last 5 years, at least in my family. And it's not that having, like we still eat meat once in a while, but we eat a lot more vegetables. It's just kind of a cultural change that doesn't feel like a loss.
Yeah.
Or the connection that you have to your garden or to insects, like the understanding of bees or worms and the role that they play. I think that all these like little things where you start to understand the sort of connectedness, which is there, but it's just like a fish not seeing the water. We kind of just forgot seeing how closely connected we are with all these systems. And I think this kind of transition of just opening your eyes to understand that the food we all had this morning is also produced in some way by plants converting sunshine into sugars that was then transferred to us, and we ate it, and now we are empowered to stand here, or the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, and all these things. Like once you start kind of diving into these like super close connections that we have with nature, I think it starts to kind of just change your view upon things, and that doesn't cost anything.
Doesn't cost anything at all. Mindsets, yeah, that's a nice point to end on. Changing mindsets, actually, that's free. Yeah. Listen, thank you. I want to give a huge round of applause to our 4 speakers. Thank you so much for being here today. It's been very lovely. Okay, I'll ask you guys to leave the stage, but if I can take one of the microphones. We're going to have one final wrap-up point. I'll just before I invite Matti Kutunen, who's a senior advisor to the Environment Ministry of Finland and from Aalto University, to come and speak for us. I'll just tell you, we're going to do, after this, there's a fishbowl discussion, which is going to be a sort of round discussion with an empty chair where people can come in. You'll have it explained more later, but please hang around and be participating in that. And we're also going to have a theatre performance later on in the day. So I'll encourage everyone to stay for as long as you possibly can and be part of that. This is the last time you'll hear from me. So I really appreciate you being here today, and for all of our speakers for their super interesting contributions, and to the organisers for having me here to host this. So I'll hand the microphone over to Matti. Thank you so much, and I wish you all a lovely rest of your day. Cheers. Thank you. Sorry. Should be on. No? Oh.
All right, now it works. So, great to be here. Good afternoon, everybody. So, I'm from the Finland's Ministry of the Environment, and it's just me between you and the refreshing break, so I'll try to be very short. What I wanted to do today is that I would like to officially launch a new program within the new European Bauhaus. So as you know, the new European Bauhaus is not just managed by the European Commission or by some small team of experts and enthusiasts here at Brussels. It's actually a movement that should engage all of us. And in this movement, there are several actions, and these actions are funded and facilitated by different countries or regions, but they are all meant for the entire Bauhaus community. So we, the Nordic countries, we thought that what could we do in this movement? How could we make things go forward? And if you have enjoyed what you've seen and heard today, interesting, very nice speeches and some exciting explorations and new things in the form of dance and performances, then I have good news for you, because this is exactly what we will be having for the next 2 years in this Nordic Bauhaus program of ours. But maybe a couple of words explaining what on earth is this Nordic carbon neutral Bauhaus. The name itself was a result of Nordic discussions in a democratic manner. So this is the outcome of the Nordic democratic discussion. But carbon neutrality, there is actually a real point there. Why are we focusing at carbon neutrality? It's that we are very short of time, as you know, in avoiding a dangerous climate disaster. And in the Nordic countries, we already see the global warming. We feel that much harder than in many other parts of the world. For instance, in my country, in Finland, the average temperature is already 2.8 degrees below, more than it used to be 100 years ago. So it's warming very rapidly. So in this, because of we want to mitigate this and we want to turn the direction of this development, we have had to put rather ambitious climate policies. And these are also embedded into building regulation. So in order to support this development and to broaden that to the entire European community, we would like to facilitate this sort of 2-year discussion round and exploration round with all of you. So that's the story behind carbon neutrality. And so this is also the ambition of many Nordic ministers, that we really need to be faster in this, and you know, the collaboration is the way forward in that aspect. So there's actually a Nordic vision that the Nordic region will be the most sustainable and integrated region in the world. And of course this sounds like, okay, now the Nordic countries are taking the stage and telling everybody else how excellent they are. But actually it's the thing is that we've discovered that we are so small country that we can't do this alone. And we probably can't have all the experts staying there in the cold, dark places where our ancestors chose to live for some reason. So therefore, we need to broaden the discussion and to do the discussion and the development with all the Europeans and everybody in this Bauhaus community in order to get it done. So that's the background. And then who do we have along in this Bauhaus of ours? As you can see, there's quite a good and merry crowd. We have 3 Nordic projects about sustainable construction and circular construction. Then we have lots of Nordic authorities from Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Iceland, and the Faroe Islands. And then we have Aalto University and the Council of Sustainable Cities. So it's a good mix of different backgrounds working for the same goal. What are we going to do in practice then? During the 2 years, we'll be arranging a set of policy debates. The first one, I hope, coming up already this autumn, together with my colleague from the Ministry of Education and Culture, who is standing there in the back. So we are going to have policy debates, then we are going to go to democracy forums in the different Nordic countries to engage with the public, and then as heads up for all architects and designers in the audience, there is probably going to be also an open design challenge. So in which we are looking for very tangible new ideas of how to transform the world better through art, design and architecture. And of course we are planning to have exhibitions as well in this theme of ours. So from all the countries who share similar flags with just different color combinations, this is meant to all of you, all the European Bauhaus audience, and we are very happy to invite you into this Nordic Bauhaus action of ours. Let's make it a joint effort, and I promise that there will be lots of different other ways of doing things in a different manner. Today we saw dancers, maybe next events we will figure out something else which will stretch our tolerance and risk-taking capacity, but we are willing to do that anyway. Now, next we will have a small break, during which I have been told there will be some wine and snacks in the back room. So hopefully with that strength, you will endure the break and then come back to the fishbowl discussion of ours in just around 20 or 30 minutes. So see you soon.